Picture this scenario because if you are listening to this right now, I guarantee you have lived it.
Oh, definitely.
You are sitting on your couch, you're comfortable, maybe watching a show, reading a book, and suddenly a physical need registers. You realize you're thirsty.
Right. You need a glass of water.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you stand up, you walk down the hallway, you cross the threshold into the kitchen, and you just stop.
You completely freeze.
Yes. You look at the refrigerator, you look at the sink, you look at the countertops, and you have absolutely no earthly idea why you are standing in the kitchen.
It is the most frustrating feeling.
It really is. You stand there for a solid 10 seconds, utterly baffled, sifting through your brain for a clue before doing the walk of shame all the way back to the couch.
And then, of course, the exact millisecond your body hits the cushions, boom.
Boom. Water. You remember the water?
Yep.
Or consider this one. You are at a networking event, or maybe a dinner party. You meet someone, they extend a hand and say, "Hi, I'm Sarah."
A classic trap.
Right. You shake their hand. You literally look them in the eye and say, "Nice to meet you, Sarah." 3 seconds later, the conversation shifts, and their name has completely evaporated from your consciousness.
Just gone. Lost to the void.
You are now staring at a human being whose identifier is just, well, deleted. When these things happen, I mean, it feels like our brains are simply broken, doesn't it?
It really does. It feels like a massive glitch in the machinery.
Like the system is just failing us.
It is incredibly relatable, and you're right, it feels like a failure. It's probably one of the most common everyday complaints human beings have about their own cognitive function.
Oh, for sure.
We tend to view these moments as structural glitches, as if our memory is, a faulty computer hard drive or a static filing cabinet where files are just randomly slipping out of their folders.
Yeah, like someone left the drawer open and the papers blew away.
Exactly. But taking a closer look at the research, specifically this comprehensive cognitive psychology textbook chapter we are using as our source for today's deep dive, it reveals something totally different.
Okay, what does it reveal?
Well, it shows that our memory isn't a static filing cabinet at all. It is an aggressively dynamic, living, heavily filtered, and remarkably complex system.
Aggressively dynamic. I like that phrasing.
Right. And more than that, it is central to literally everything we do. I mean, think about it. Without memory, perception means absolutely nothing.
Because you wouldn't know what you were looking at.
Exactly. Problem solving is impossible. Decision making ceases to exist. Fundamentally, our very sense of identity, who we are, who we love, what we believe, it's entirely constructed from this system.
So we are our memories, basically.
We really are. So when you forget why you walked into the kitchen, it's not a glitch. It's actually the system functioning under a very specific set of rules.
Well, why does that happen then? Because that's the mission of today's deep dive. We are cracking open the architecture of the human brain to find out.
And it is a fascinating architecture.
It really is. We are going to trace the exact journey of a piece of information. From the moment it hits your eyeballs or eardrums, to how it gets temporarily juggled in your mind, to how it gets permanently etched into your identity.
Yeah, the whole pipeline.
And perhaps more importantly, we're going to look at why we inevitably lose some of that information, and then how we can use the actual science of cognition to hack the system and enhance our recall.
Turn you into a memory master.
That is the goal. So before we can talk about becoming memory masters and remembering every single name at a dinner party, we really have to establish the ground rules.
We have to look at the anatomy of how a memory is actually born.
Right. And based on the literature we're analyzing today, it seems like it's essentially a three-step dance. And if any one of these steps is off, the whole thing just falls apart.
Yeah, the scientific consensus points to 3 deeply interdependent stages that any piece of information must survive to become a functional memory.
Okay, what are those stages?
Those stages are encoding, storage, and retrieval. And you hit the nail on the head earlier. If the chain breaks at any single one of those links, the memory fails.
So let's look at encoding first, because that's the absolute starting line, right?
Yes, the starting line. Encoding is the process where incoming sensory information is registered and translated into a format that the brain can actually use.
Translated how?
Well, when an external stimulus occurs, let's say you hear a dog bark or you see a bright red car, that physical reality hits your sensory organs. Your eyes and ears generate neural impulses.
Just raw electrical data.
Exactly. Your brain receives these electrical signals, extracts some sort of meaning from them, and represents that meaning in the neural circuitry. If the brain doesn't do that translation, the information simply bounces off you.
So if I can use an analogy here, it sounds a lot like creating a digital document.
Oh, that's a perfect analogy.
Encoding is the physical act of typing the words on the keyboard. I mean, you can have all the thoughts in the world, but if you don't actually hit the keys and translate your thoughts into the word processor, the document literally doesn't exist within the computer's ecosystem.
That analogy holds up beautifully, especially when we look at the second stage, which is storage.
Right, because what happens after you spend an hour typing that document?
If you just close the laptop, you lose everything. You have to hit save.
You always have to hit save.
Always. Storage is the mechanism of retaining that encoded information over a period of time. It has to be held in the system so that it can be put to use later.
Saving it to the hard drives. Got it. And that leads directly to the third step, the one that actually matters when I'm standing clueless in my kitchen staring at the blender.
Retrieval.
Yes, retrieval. Opening the file back up.
Exactly the same concept.
Yeah.
Retrieval is the act of bringing that stored information back out of the dark archives and into your active conscious awareness so you can perform a cognitive task.
So whether that task is solving a complex mathematical equation or just remembering that you walked into this room to fetch a glass of water.
Precisely. And the critical takeaway here, and this explains a lot of our everyday frustrations, is that what we call forgetting isn't just one thing.
What do you mean by that?
I mean that memory failure can occur at any of these 3 points. When you blank on Sarah's name at the party, it might not be that you forgot it in the traditional sense of it fading away.
Like, didn't just delete itself.
Right. It is highly likely you failed at the very first stage. You never actually encoded it.
Oh, wow. So I never even typed it into the document.
Exactly. You were shaking her hand, smiling, thinking about what you were going to say next, and you didn't dedicate the cognitive resources to encode the acoustic sound of her name. You can't retrieve a file you never created.
You know, that distinction alone takes a lot of the guilt away. I didn't lose the memory, I just never bothered to build it in the first place.
Exactly. It's an attention issue, not a memory storage issue.
But I want to pause on this computer analogy we're using. You know, typing, saving, retrieving. We use those terms so casually now, but looking at the history in our sources, it seems like this comparison to computers wasn't just a convenient metaphor.
No, not at all.
It actually revolutionized the entire field of psychology back in the late 1960s, didn't it?
It was a massive paradigm shift.
Yeah.
Prior to the widespread understanding of computer architecture, the prevailing models of human memory were, well, somewhat vague.
How so?
People thought of it as a vast, dusty storehouse, like a big, empty room where experiences were just tossed into piles.
That sounds incredibly inefficient.
It was, but the advent of computer science provided cognitive psychologists with a powerful new vocabulary and a structural framework.
And that led to a specific model, right?
Yes, it culminated in 1968 when Richard Atkinson and Richard Schifrin proposed what is now known as the information processing approach. Specifically, their stage model of memory.
So they looked at a computer, which has RAM, random access memory, the temporary workspace where active tasks happen,
Right.
and a hard disk, which is the permanent long-term storage.
Exactly. They argued that human memory operates on a remarkably similar division of labor, manipulating information through distinct stages based on commands and the tasks at hand.
Okay, let's trace that path then, following the Atkinson and Schifrin blueprint. If a piece of information is trying to get into my brain, it doesn't just teleport to the hard drive.
Definitely not.
It starts at the absolute outer boundaries of our perception. The source material calls this sensory memory.
Yeah, sensory memory is the ultimate front door. It is the absolute first stop for any incoming information from the physical world.
And its characteristics are quite extreme.
Very extreme. On one hand, it has a massive, almost limitless capacity. For a fraction of a second, your sensory memory registers an exact, perfect replica of the stimulus.
Like everything around me.
Everything. It captures everything in your visual field, every frequency of sound hitting your ears, the physical pressure of your clothes on your skin.
That is wild.
It is, but the trade-off for that massive capacity is its duration. It is incredibly fleeting. We are talking about durations of less than a single second.
Wait, less than a second. That feels almost uselessly short. I mean, if it disappears that fast, how does it help us at all?
It seems brief, yeah, but it is evolutionarily critical for us to perceive the world as a continuous stream rather than a series of choppy, disconnected photographs.
Okay, that makes sense.
The sources highlight 2 specific types of sensory registers to illustrate how this works. The first is iconic memory, which deals with visual information.
Iconic, meaning visual.
Right. Think about a time you were in a dark room and someone turned a bright light bulb on and then immediately off.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
For a fraction of a second after the room goes dark again, you still see a glowing after image of the filament floating in the darkness.
Oh, yeah. Or, like being a kid on the 4th of July with a sparkler.
Perfect example.
You wave it in a circle, and you don't just see a moving point of light, you actually see a continuous ring of fire suspended in the air.
Exactly. That ring of fire does not physically exist. What you are experiencing is your iconic memory.
So my eyes are holding on to it.
Your visual system is holding on to the image of the sparkler's position just long enough for the next position to be registered, blending them together so your brain can process the trajectory.
Wow, without iconic memory, motion would just look disjointed and chaotic.
Totally chaotic. Then you have echoic memory, which is the auditory equivalent.
Echoic auditory. Got it.
When a sound abruptly stops, you can still hear a faint, lingering reverberation of it in your mind for a brief moment.
Wait, is that why someone can ask me a question while I'm distracted? I can say what? And then before they even repeat themselves, I suddenly realize I actually know what they said.
Yes.
So I'm essentially reading the audio file out of my echoic memory just before it deletes.
That is a flawless real-world example. Your echoic register held the exact acoustic trace of their voice for a second or two, giving your conscious mind just enough time to shift its focus and retrieve it before the trace decayed.
That is so cool. But this brings us to a pretty significant mechanical problem.
What's that?
Right, because if our senses are literally taking in millions of details a second, the hum of my refrigerator, the feeling of the temperature in the room, the specific shade of paint on the wall, and my peripheral vision,
Not all of it.
and sensory memory is capturing all of it perfectly, why doesn't the system crash? I mean, if I try to open a million high-resolution images on my laptop at the same time, it freezes. Why doesn't the human brain explode from information overload?
That's a great question. The reason your brain doesn't crash is because it comes equipped with a ruthless, highly efficient filtering mechanism known as selective attention.
Selective attention.
Yeah. If sensory memory is a massive nightclub, selective attention is the ultimate bouncer at the VIP door. And this bouncer has a very strict guest list.
Oh, I love that bouncer analogy.
Remember, the information in sensory memory decays in under a second. Any sense impression that does not actively receive your attention simply fades into nothingness instantly.
Just deleted.
Completely. Only the specific information that the bouncer deems relevant based on your current goals, your survival instincts, or the intensity of the stimulus is allowed to pass through the doors into the next stage of the cognitive system.
So the vast, vast majority of what you experience is intentionally ignored.
Intentionally and aggressively ignored.
Yeah. So the bouncer looks at the hum of the refrigerator and says, not relevant, deny entry.
Right.
But it looks at the sound of someone calling my name and says, priority access, let it through.
Exactly.
Once that prioritized information gets past the bouncer, where is it going? It leaves the fleeting world of sensory memory and steps into what the stage model calls short-term memory.
Yes, short-term memory, or STM. And the environment here is completely different from sensory memory. Well, while sensory memory is vast but lasts less than a second, STM is much more restricted in capacity, but it holds information for a slightly longer period, typically about 30 seconds or less, assuming you don't actively do anything to keep it there.
Okay, 30 seconds.
And Atkinson and Schifrin posited that information entering this stage is primarily encoded acoustically, meaning even if you read a string of numbers on a page visually, your short-term memory translates them into sounds.
That totally tracks with how I behave.
Really? How so?
Yeah, if I'm trying to log into a website and they text me a 6-digit verification code, I read the text, but as I walk over to my laptop, I'm literally muttering the numbers out loud, or at least hearing them in my inner voice, like 482, 482.
Yep. What you were demonstrating right there is a specific control process called maintenance rehearsal.
Maintenance rehearsal.
It is the act of silent or vocal repetition. By continually looping that acoustic information, you are artificially extending its life in your short-term memory.
As long as I keep repeating 482, it stays active.
Exactly. But the crucial vulnerability of STM is that the moment your maintenance rehearsal is interrupted, say, your spouse asks you a quick question while you're walking to the laptop, the loop is broken.
And the verification code vanishes within 30 seconds.
Gone.
And beyond the time limit, STM is famous for having a very rigid space limit, right?
Yeah.
The famous magic number.
Yes, this stems from cognitive psychologist George Miller's incredibly influential 1956 paper. It's often referred to as the magical number 7 plus or minus 2.
Right, 7 plus or minus 2.
Miller observed that across a variety of tasks, the human short-term memory seems artificially constrained to holding roughly 5 to 9 discrete items or chunks of information at any given time.
So it's a hard limit.
Very hard. If you try to hold 10 or 11 random items in your mind without writing them down, the earliest items will be pushed out by the new ones. It's a strict bottleneck.
But the sources outline a brilliant loophole to this bottleneck, a technique called chunking.
Oh, chunking is essential.
Right, because if the capacity is limited by the number of items, you can cheat the system by making the items bigger and more meaningful.
Let's hear an example.
Let's test this. If I try to memorize the digits 1947194920004, that is a 12-digit string. Under Miller's law of 7 plus or minus 2, my brain should absolutely fail to hold that sequence. The bottleneck is too tight.
Way too tight.
But if I look at those same digits and group them, or chunk them, into meaningful years like 1947, 1949, 2004, suddenly I am no longer trying to remember 12 random numbers. I am only trying to remember 3 specific historical dates, 3 chunks.
Exactly. You have effectively reduced your cognitive load from 12 independent units to 3 meaningful units.
Because 1947 connects to Indian independence, 1949 connects to the adoption of the Indian Constitution, 2004 connects to the Indian Ocean tsunami.
By imposing order on the chaos, and by linking the raw incoming data to pre-existing knowledge in your long-term memory, you completely bypass the strict physical limitations of the short-term memory holding cell.
That is just a massive life hack.
It really is.
Now, this is where the narrative takes a major left turn.
Oh, the plot twist.
Yeah. Up until this point, the Atkinson and Shiffrin model paints this very neat linear pipeline. Information hits the senses, gets filtered into the short-term memory waiting room, and from there, it gets passed along to long-term permanent storage.
Right, a straight line.
It heavily implies that short-term memory is a mandatory toll booth. If you want to get to long-term memory, you must pass through short-term memory first. But, as we know, science rarely stays neat and tidy.
It rarely does, no. And the paradigm-shifting plot twist arrived in 1970, courtesy of a patient known in the medical literature as patient KF.
Patient KF.
This case study, conducted by researchers Tim Challis and Elizabeth Warrington, completely dismantled the linear stage model.
What happened to him?
Well, patient KF was a man who had unfortunately suffered highly specific brain damage to his left cerebral hemisphere following a motorcycle accident. The result of this damage was a profound impairment of his short-term memory capacity.
How impaired?
His digit span, the number of sequential digits he could repeat back, was reduced to just 1 or 2 items. His short-term holding cell was essentially demolished.
Okay, so if we apply the logic of the Atkinson-Shiffrin pipeline, if his short-term memory toll booth is completely destroyed, it should be physically impossible for any new information to reach his long-term memory.
That's the logical conclusion.
The road is out. He should be incapable of learning new facts or forming permanent memories.
That is exactly what the linear model predicted. But the reality of patient KF defied the model.
He could still form memories.
Yes. Despite having a functionally ruined short-term memory, KF's long-term memory was perfectly intact. He could accurately recall past events from before the accident, and more importantly, he was still capable of learning and retaining certain new information in the long term. This empirical evidence was a bombshell for cognitive psychology. It definitively proved that memory is not a single-file pipeline. The system is not strictly sequential.
So you can have a decimated short-term memory and still possess a highly functional long-term memory.
Exactly.
It completely shatters the idea of a simple waiting room. It proved the brain was doing something far more sophisticated than just holding things in a line.
It forced the entire scientific community to rethink the architecture. And this rethinking culminated in 1986 with British psychologist Alan Baddeley.
What did Baddeley propose?
He proposed a multi-component model that we now refer to as working memory. He argued that we need to stop looking at STM as a passive waiting room where information just sits around waiting to be saved.
Okay, so if it's not a waiting room, what is it?
Instead, we should view it as a highly active workbench.
A workbench.
Yeah. It is a dynamic, complex workspace where information is constantly being grabbed, manipulated, transformed, and integrated as you perform active cognitive tasks.
A mental workbench. I really like that visual. And a workbench isn't just an empty table, right? It has specific tools and stations. How does Baddeley break down this working memory?
Baddeley identified three primary specialized components to this workbench. The first tool is the phonological loop.
The phonological loop.
This is the station responsible for handling speech-based and acoustic information. It has a very limited capacity, and unless you actively rehearse the sounds, they decay within about 2 seconds.
Okay.
When you are silently reading a book and hearing the words in your head, or when you are repeating that verification code to yourself, you are actively utilizing the phonological loop.
So the phonological loop is basically my inner voice.
Precisely. The second tool on the workbench is the visuospatial sketchpad.
Visuospatial sketchpad.
As the name implies, this component temporarily stores and manipulates visual and spatial information.
Give me an example of that.
Well, if you close your eyes right now and try to mentally count the number of windows on the front of your house, or if you were trying to mentally rotate a piece of furniture to see if it will fit through a doorway, you are projecting those images onto your visuospatial sketchpad.
Okay, so if the phonological loop is the audio track, the sketchpad is the video display.
That's a great way to put it.
But if these two systems are running simultaneously, who is in charge? I mean, is there just a little guy inside my head watching the video and listening to the audio? Because that feels like a philosophical trap, who is inside the little guy's head?
You're hitting on a classic philosophical critique, the homunculus problem. But Baddeley's model avoids that trap with his third component, the central executive.
The central executive.
The boss.
Right. The central executive is not a little person viewing the data. It is an attentional control system. It is the boss of the workbench.
What does the boss do? Crucially, the central executive does not actually store any information itself. Instead, its job is entirely organizational. It coordinates the activities of the phonological loop and the sketchpad.
Oh, okay.
It decides what you should pay attention to, it plans behavioral sequences, and it acts as the interface, pulling necessary rules and facts out of your permanent long-term memory to help process the current task.
Can you walk me through how all three of those components work together in a real-world scenario?
Sure, let's take a common cognitive task. Doing a moderately complex math problem in your head, like 43 minus 17.
Okay, 43 minus 17.
The moment you hear the problem, your central executive snaps to attention and takes control of the workbench. It delegates the sound of the numbers, 43, 17, to the phonological loop to keep them active.
So my inner voice is saying the numbers.
Exactly. Simultaneously, it might utilize the visuospatial sketchpad to mentally visualize the numbers stacked on top of each other, just like you would write them on a piece of paper.
Yep, I'm picturing them stacked right now.
Finally, the central executive dives into your long-term memory to retrieve the procedural rules of subtraction and the specific fact that 13 minus 7 equals 6.
Oh.
It pulls all these separate threads together on the workbench, manipulates the data, and produces the answer 26.
That is utterly fascinating. It's an entire symphony of cognitive modules working in perfect concert just to do basic arithmetic.
It really is beautiful.
All right, so we've survived the initial flash of the sensory register, we've passed the bouncer of selective attention, and we've been manipulated and processed on the dynamic workbench of working memory. Now we arrive at the final destination.
The grand vault.
The grand vault. How does a piece of information actually graduate from the workbench and become permanently etched into long-term memory, or LTM?
To get into the permanent vault, we have to upgrade our strategies. Earlier, we talked about maintenance rehearsal, just repeating that verification code over and over. That works for keeping things active on the workbench, but it is highly inefficient for transferring information into permanent storage. Rote repetition does not build strong memories.
So it does.
To breach the vault, you need what psychologists call elaborative rehearsal. Unlike maintenance rehearsal, elaborative rehearsal requires active, deliberate effort to connect the new, incoming information to knowledge that is already securely anchored in your long-term memory.
Meaning what exactly?
You don't just encode the sound or the look of the information, you encode it semantically, meaning you encode its deep meaning.
So let's say I'm studying for a vocabulary test, and I need to learn the word benevolence.
Okay.
If I just pace around my room chanting benevolence, benevolence,
Sure.
benevolence, I'm using maintenance rehearsal, and it's probably going to bounce right off my brain.
Highly likely.
But if I stop and I actively link the word benevolence to concepts I already deeply understand, like compassion and charity, and maybe I spend a minute thinking about a specific time my grandmother acted benevolently toward me,
Yes.
I am weaving the new word into a massive existing web of memories. That is elaborative rehearsal.
That is the perfect execution of it. You are taking a fragile new thread of information and tying it to dozens of strong, pre-existing anchors.
And that makes it stick.
The more semantic associations you create around the new information, the more durable and permanent the memory trace becomes. This exact mechanism was formalized in 1972 by researchers Fergus Craig and Robert Lockhart.
What do they call it?
They formalized it in a massively influential framework called the levels of processing theory. They argued that human memory shouldn't be defined by the boxes or stages the information moves through, but rather by the depth at which the information is mentally processed.
The depth of processing.
The core premise is simple. The deeper you process something, the longer you will remember it.
And they broke this processing down into 3 distinct depths, right? Like wading into a pool.
Yes, 3 depths. The most superficial level is structural processing. This is when you only pay attention to the bare, physical features of a stimulus.
For
example, if I flash the word "see at" on a screen and ask you, was the word written in uppercase or lowercase letters? You are engaging in structural processing. You are only looking at the visual geometry of the ink.
Okay. Structural is the shallow end.
The memory trace produced by this level of processing is incredibly fragile and easily forgotten.
Right. What's the next level?
Moving slightly deeper, we reach the intermediate level, which is phonetic processing. Here, you are attending to the acoustic properties, the sound of the word.
So not what it looks like, but what it sounds like.
Exactly. If I show you the word "see at" and ask, does this word rhyme with H-A-T? You have to mentally pronounce it. It requires more cognitive effort than just looking at the font, so it creates a slightly stronger memory trace, but it's still not ideal for long-term retention.
Which brings us to the deep end of the pool.
The deep end is semantic processing. This is where you completely bypass the physical look and the sound of the word, and you analyze its core meaning and its relationship to other concepts.
So asking what it means.
Right. If I show you the word "see at" and ask, is this a mammal that has 4 legs and chases mice? Or how does this animal compare to a dog? You are forced to access your semantic network.
You're actually thinking about it.
You process the concept deeply, which results in a highly robust, long-lasting memory trace.
You know, I love mapping this onto social interactions. It's exactly like meeting someone new at a party.
Oh, let's hear this.
Shallow structural processing is noticing, oh, they're wearing a blue shirt and glasses. You will absolutely forget them by the time you leave.
Completely.
Intermediate phonetic processing is actively noting, okay, their name is Sarah. Sarah sounds like Tara. I'll try to remember that. It's better, but it's still fragile.
Definitely.
But deep semantic processing is standing by the snack table, talking to Sarah, and discovering that she shares the exact same incredibly obscure, bizarre hobby as your sister, like, I don't know, competitive antique clock restoration.
That's very obscure.
Right. But suddenly, your brain is lighting up, making massive connections to your family history, your emotions, your knowledge of clocks. You have processed Sarah semantically. She is locked into the vault.
It's a brilliant translation of the theory. The effort required to make those meaningful connections is exactly what constructs the permanent memory.
So she's in the vault now.
She is. Now, once that deeply processed information officially enters the long-term memory vault, it's crucial to understand that the vault itself is not just one giant, disorganized cavern where all memories float around together.
It's organized.
Highly organized, LTM is compartmentalized into very distinct types of memory systems.
Let's map the geography of that vault, because the source material breaks it down into some fascinating categories. The primary overarching division seems to be between declarative memory and procedural memory.
That is the fundamental split. Let's start with declarative memory, which is sometimes referred to as explicit memory.
What lives in there?
This category houses all the factual information you have accumulated: names, dates, historical events, concepts. The defining characteristic of declarative memory is that it is information you can easily bring to conscious awareness and explicitly declare or state out loud.
So, trivia facts.
Basically, knowing that a standard car has 4 wheels, knowing that water boils at 100 degrees Celsius, or knowing the name of the current president, those are declarative facts.
And on the other side of the split is procedural memory.
Procedural memory, or non-declarative memory, is entirely different. It relates to motor skills, habits, and learned behaviors. It is the memory of how to do things.
Like physical skills.
Right. How to ride a bicycle, how to tie your shoes, how to touch type on a keyboard.
The most obvious difference to me is how impossible it is to describe procedural memories.
What do you mean?
I mean, I could easily declare the fact that the Apollo 11 moon landing happened in 1969. That's declarative. But if you hand me a pen and paper and ask me to explicitly write out the exact, precise physical mechanics of how to balance on a moving two-wheeled bicycle, I would fail. I can't put it into words.
It's extremely
The
difficult.
knowledge doesn't live in my language centers. It lives in my muscles and my reflexes. My body just knows.
That is exactly the distinction researchers make. Procedural memory operates largely outside of conscious verbal recall.
Okay, so that's procedural. What about declarative again?
Returning to the declarative side of the vault, the facts we can state out loud, a prominent cognitive psychologist named Endel Tolving proposed that this branch needs to be divided even further
Into what?
into episodic memory and semantic memory.
Let's break those down. What is an episodic memory?
Episodic memory is essentially your internal autobiographical documentary. It contains the specific events and experiences of your personal life.
Like my own personal movie.
Exactly. What you had for breakfast this morning, the overwhelming joy of your college graduation, the specific argument you had with a friend last week. The defining feature of episodic memories is that they are deeply contextualized. They are inextricably tied to specific times, specific places, and most importantly, specific emotional states. You remember the episode.
Okay, so episodic relates to the episodes of my life. I'm the main character. What about semantic memory?
If episodic memory is your personal diary, semantic memory is your mental encyclopedia.
Encyclopedia.
It houses your general awareness, objective facts, logic, and concepts about the world, completely detached from your personal experience. Mathematical rules, vocabulary definitions, the fact that the capital of France is Paris.
So just pure facts.
Yes. Unlike episodic memories, semantic memories are generally not dated or tied to an emotion. You likely have absolutely no episodic memory of the exact day, room, or emotional state you were in when you first learned that 2 + 2 = 4.
No, I definitely don't.
The personal context has fallen away, leaving only the pure semantic fact. And because they are stripped of subjective emotions, semantic memories tend to be more robust and less susceptible to distortion or forgetting over time.
Now, while we're exploring the geography of this vault, the source material highlights several specific phenomena that occur within long-term memory that I find absolutely wild.
Oh, they are fascinating.
I want to unpack these, starting with flashbulb memories. Because we just said episodic memories are tied to emotions, but a flashbulb memory seems like an episodic memory on steroids.
That's a highly accurate description. A flashbulb memory occurs when we experience an event of extreme emotional arousal, shock, or historical significance.
Like a national tragedy.
Exactly. During these moments, our memory mechanism seems to act like a high-speed camera, freezing the moment in extraordinary vivid detail.
So you remember everything about that moment.
Yes. People possessing a flashbulb memory can often recall exactly where they were standing, who they were talking to, the exact words spoken, and even trivial details like what clothes they were wearing when they received the news.
Why does it do that?
The prevailing psychological theory is that the extreme novelty and the intense emotional spike trigger a massive physiological response. It essentially forces the brain to encode the environment at an unusually deep, highly focused level.
It's like the brain recognizes a critical threat or a monumental shift in reality and screams, "This is vital for survival," freeze frame.
That's exactly it.
Everyone has one of these for major cultural tragedies or immense personal shocks. What fascinates me is the paradox of our autobiographical timeline.
The timeline.
Yeah, on one hand, I have a crystal clear flashbulb memory of a random Tuesday afternoon 15 years ago. On the other hand, we suffer from childhood amnesia.
Ah, yes, childhood amnesia.
I cannot remember a single verifiable episodic detail from the first 3 or 4 years of my life. It's just a blank slate. Why does a vault completely delete our earliest years?
Childhood amnesia, or infantile amnesia, is one of the most profound, lingering mysteries in developmental psychology. Across almost all cultures, individuals report a virtual absence of genuine episodic memories from before the age of 4.
It's just universal.
Pretty much. And to clarify, we aren't talking about semantic memory.
Yeah.
A 3-year-old obviously learns and remembers vocabulary and how to walk.
Right. Procedural and semantic are working.
It is specifically the autobiographical episodic memory that fails to hold. There are several compelling theories for this. Neurologically, it's theorized that the hippocampus, which is the brain structure critically responsible for consolidating episodic memories, simply isn't mature enough during infancy to lay down permanent traces.
So the hardware just isn't fully installed yet.
That's one part of it. The cognitive explanation focuses on language. Episodic memories are largely stored as narratives. We tell ourselves the story of what happened to us.
Oh, that makes sense.
Until a child develops a robust capacity for language and a sophisticated sense of self, the ability to recognize themselves as an independent entity moving through time, they may simply lack the cognitive scaffolding required to package and store a narrative memory.
They just don't have the words to save the file.
Exactly. But the timeline of autobiographical memory has another fascinating quirk. While the first 4 years are blank, researchers have identified a phenomenon called the reminiscence bump.
The reminiscence bump. What is that?
When older adults are asked to recall memories from their lives, there is a massive, disproportionate spike in the number of memories they retrieve from their late teens and 20s.
Oh, well, I can completely understand why the brain prioritizes that decade.
Why is that?
Your 20s are essentially an unbroken sequence of high-stakes novelty and emotional firsts. You move out of your parents' house, you get your first serious job, you navigate major romantic relationships, you figure out your identity.
It's a very busy time.
The brain is being bombarded with highly salient, deeply processed material. It makes sense that the vault is packed with those files.
It's a very logical conclusion.
But before we leave the vault, we have to touch on implicit memory, which is arguably the spookiest concept in the entire chapter.
Spooky is a good word for it. Implicit memory is fascinating because it forces us to redefine what a memory actually is.
How so?
Implicit memory refers to information that profoundly influences your current behavior and cognitive processing, despite the fact that it lies completely outside of your conscious awareness.
I don't know I know it.
Right. You cannot actively retrieve it, yet it dictates your actions.
And a classic example of this is the keyboard, right?
Yes, the touch typing phenomenon. If you are a proficient typist, you have heavily ingrained procedural and implicit memory of the keyboard layout. Your fingers fly across the keys effortlessly.
Right.
But if I were to suddenly cover your hands, hand you a blank diagram of a standard QWERTY keyboard, and ask you to consciously, deliberately fill in the letters in their correct positions, you would likely fail, or at least struggle immensely.
That is so deeply weird to experience. I mean, I'm an incredibly fast typer, but if I try to visualize the middle row right now, my conscious mind is completely blank.
It's totally hidden from you.
The knowledge is definitively inside my brain. My fingers prove it every day. But my conscious central executive doesn't have the security clearance to access it verbally.
Exactly. And psychologists can actively demonstrate and measure this hidden memory system in laboratories using a technique called priming.
Priming, how does that work?
In a typical priming experiment, a researcher might have a participant casually read through a long list of completely random words like garden, playground, envelope.
Okay.
An hour later, under the guise of a different test, the researcher asks the participant to recall the list. Naturally, the participant forgets most of them.
Because they probably didn't use elaborative rehearsal.
Right. Then the researcher shifts tactics and gives the participant a word completion task. They provide fragments of words like GAR blank 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 or ENV blank 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 and ask the participant to complete them with the first word that pops into their head.
And what happens?
Participants will overwhelmingly and rapidly complete the fragments with garden and envelope, the words they saw earlier. But here is the critical part. When the researcher asks them, "Did you use the words from the earlier list?" the participants genuinely say, "No, I didn't remember those. Garden just randomly popped into my head. I was just guessing."
That is incredible. They have absolutely zero conscious episodic memory of seeing the word garden. But the prior exposure subtly manipulated their brain's semantic network, priming them to produce that specific behavior later.
Exactly. It's operating entirely in the background.
It really proves the vault is deeper and darker than we realize. But, this brings us to a massive contradiction and really the pivot point of our deep dive today.
What's the contradiction?
We have spent the last half hour establishing this incredibly robust system. We have sensory registers capturing perfect replicas of reality. We have dynamic working benches juggling data. We have semantic vaults filled with flashbulb moments, intricate semantic webs, and hidden implicit skills.
It's an amazing machine.
And the literature suggests long-term memory has a virtually unlimited capacity.
It does.
So if all of that machinery is so powerful and so permanent, why do we constantly forget things? Why did I stand in the kitchen with no idea why I was there? What is the actual mechanism of forgetting?
To truly understand the mechanics of forgetting, we have to look back to the late 19th century, specifically to the year 1885. and a pioneering German psychologist named Hermann Ebbinghaus.
Ebbinghaus.
Yes, Ebbinghaus was fundamentally the first scientist to rigorously, systematically quantify human memory and the rate of forgetting. And his methodology was remarkably dedicated. He used himself as the sole test subject.
Oh, a sample size of 1.
Yes, he invented hundreds of nonsense syllables, which are three-letter consonant-vowel consonant combinations that possess absolutely no meaning in the German language. Words like ZUQ, NOK, or SEP.
Just complete gibberish.
Complete gibberish.
Yeah.
He would force himself to memorize massive lists of these nonsense syllables and then meticulously track how many he forgot and exactly how long it took him to forget them over various intervals of time.
You know, I have to play devil's advocate here and challenge his entire premise.
Go for it.
If we just spent 20 minutes talking about how human memory relies on meaning, on semantic processing, on building webs of associations to things we care about, isn't memorizing NOK and SEPI a terrible, highly unnatural way to measure memory?
It's a very valid critique.
We don't memorize gibberish in the real world. We memorize concepts with context. Doesn't his experiment kind of exist in an artificial vacuum that ignores how the brain actually works?
That is a very sophisticated critique, and it's one that modern cognitive psychologists have debated for years.
Yeah.
You are entirely correct that it lacks ecological validity. It doesn't mirror real-world learning.
Right.
However, from a purely scientific standpoint, Ebbinghaus's methodology was brilliant precisely because it existed in a vacuum.
How so?
Remember the levels of processing theory. If Ebbinghaus had used a list of real words like apple, dog, river, his pre-existing semantic knowledge and emotional associations with those words would have actively interfered with the data.
Oh, I see. Some words would be easy to remember just because he liked them or knew them well.
Exactly. By using pure nonsense syllables, he completely eliminated the variables of meaning, prior knowledge, and elaborative rehearsal. He stripped the mind down to its barest mechanical function to measure the raw, unadulterated rate at which a pure structural trace decays.
Okay, I see the logic. He needed a completely blank slate to measure the baseline hardware performance. And what did the data on this raw hardware performance actually show?
It revealed what we now call the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve, and the reality of this curve is quite brutal.
Brutal how?
Ebbinghaus proved that forgetting does not occur at a steady, gentle, linear pace. It is a steep cliff. The rate of forgetting is at its absolute precipitous maximum within the first 9 hours after learning new information.
9 hours.
Yes, and it's of most violent within the very first hour.
Yeah.
You lose a staggering percentage of the raw data almost immediately after acquiring it.
Wow.
But then, an interesting thing happens. The curve abruptly flattens out. Whatever percentage of the information you manage to retain after that initial sharp drop tends to stabilize and stay with you over a much longer period.
The forgetting cliff. That explains why cramming for an exam at 8 a.m. mostly works for a 10 a.m. test, but by the next day, the knowledge is entirely gone.
The cliff ticket.
So we know that we forget, and we know the timeline of when we forget, but we still need to answer why the information falls off the cliff. Our sources outline several competing theories of forgetting. Let's start with the oldest one, trace decay, which is sometimes called disuse theory.
Trace decay is the most intuitive theory. It aligns with our everyday experience of the physical world.
How does it work?
The premise assumes that the act of learning something physically alters the nervous system, leaving a structural mark, a memory trace, or an enneagram in the brain.
A physical mark.
Yes. Disuse theory argues that this physical trace is fragile. If you do not actively practice or recall the memory over a long period of time, the physical trace simply erodes, fades away, and ultimately disappears.
So it's like a dirt path through a forest, right?
Yeah.
If no one walks on it for a year, the weeds grow back and the path is gone.
That is the exact metaphor often used.
That makes perfect logical sense. If I just rest my brain, do absolutely nothing, and don't walk the path, the trace should decay over time. But the text aggressively points out that this theory was scientifically challenged and largely deemed inadequate. Why?
It was proven inadequate by a very elegant observation regarding the passage of time and the state of sleep.
Sleep.
Yes, if forgetting is purely a function of time passing and the resulting decay of a physical trace, then a person who goes to sleep immediately after learning a list of words should forget more of those words than a person who stays awake for the same amount of time.
Wait, why is that?
Because the sleeping person is completely inactive, they are definitely not rehearsing or using the memory trace.
Right, the sleeping brain is supposedly doing nothing, so the path should be overgrowing with weeds at maximum speed. But I'm guessing that isn't what the data shows.
The data shows the exact opposite. Experiments consistently demonstrate that individuals who sleep after memorizing information retain significantly more of that information than those who remain awake and engage in normal daily activities for the same duration. Really?
Sleep actually protects and consolidates the memory trace. This finding struck a fatal blow to the idea that forgetting is just passive decay over time. The time passed in both scenarios, but the forgetting rates were vastly different.
Therefore, time alone is not the culprit.
Exactly. Something else happening during that waking time must be causing the forgetting.
And that something else brings us to the second major framework, interference theory. The waking brain isn't just decaying, it's getting cluttered.
Precisely. Interference theory posits that we forget because the massive amounts of information stored in our long-term memory vault are constantly competing and interfering with each other.
They're fighting.
Yes. It's not that the specific memory trace has evaporated into nothingness. It's that other similar memories are actively blocking your path to retrieving it. Your brain is essentially suffering from a localized traffic jam.
And the source material explains that this traffic jam can flow in two different directions, which they call proactive and retroactive interference. Let's untangle these. Let's start with proactive interference, which means forward-moving interference. This occurs when old, deeply entrenched information that you learned in the past moves forward in time to actively disrupt and interfere with your ability to learn and recall new information.
Give me an example of forward moving.
For example, imagine you have spent your entire life fluent in English and you decide to take intensive French lessons. You will likely find French grammatical structures incredibly frustrating to learn.
Because the English rules are in the way.
Exactly. The rules of English grammar are so deeply hardwired into your brain that they continually pop up and actively block the new French rules from taking root. The old blocks the new.
Proactive, old ruins, new. Got it. And the inverse of that would be retroactive interference, which moves backward.
Correct. Retroactive interference is when newly acquired information moves backward in time to overwrite, disrupt, or block your access to older information.
So new ruins old.
Right. Let's continue the language example. Imagine you spend a year living in Paris, fully immersed, intensely studying French every single day.
Sounds amazing.
It does. But when you return home and try to speak English, you might find yourself occasionally stumbling, blanking on a simple English vocabulary word, and having the French word aggressively pop into your mind instead.
Wow, so the French overwrote the English.
The massive influx of new French learning has retroactively interfered with your access to your native English lexicon. The new blocks the old.
It paints a picture of the mind as this chaotic, hyper-competitive battleground where memories are just constantly wrestling each other for dominance.
It really is a battleground.
But as chaotic as that sounds, there is a third theory that I find the most comforting, honestly. And it brings us back to Endel Tulving, the researcher who defined episodic memory earlier. He proposed the theory of retrieval failure.
Tulving's theory of cue-dependent forgetting offers a very different perspective. He argues that in many cases, the memory trace has not decayed, and it hasn't necessarily been hopelessly buried by interference.
Where is it then?
The information is fully intact, safe and sound, within the vault of long-term memory. The reason you are failing to remember it is simply because, at the specific moment you are trying to access it, you lack the appropriate retrieval cues required to unlock that specific file.
That completely reframes the problem.
It does.
It's like having a highly specific, rare book located inside a massive, sprawling, multi-story library.
Okay, I like this.
The book is definitely in the building. It hasn't been burned. It hasn't been stolen. It exists. But the central computer catalog system is down, and you don't have the call number.
So you can't find it.
Right. You could wander the aisles for a decade and never find it, leaving you to assume the book is lost forever. But if a librarian suddenly hands you a slip of paper with a precise call number, the retrieval cue, you can walk directly to the 4th floor, row 7, and pull the book off the shelf instantly.
That is a phenomenal evolution of the library metaphor because it perfectly captures Tulving's experimental findings.
What were his findings?
He conducted studies where participants were given long lists of words that covertly belonged to specific categories. For instance, lists containing types of metals, insects, and furniture.
Okay.
When asked for free recall later, participants might only remember a handful of words. It looked like massive forgetting had occurred. However, when Tulving provided them with the category name, saying the word insects, suddenly the participants could perfectly recall the word wasp or beetle from the list.
A cue unlocked it.
The memory was undeniably there the whole time. The brain just needed the precise categorical key to unlock the pathway to it. And importantly, retrieval cues aren't just verbal. The physical context, the environment where you encoded the memory, can act as a powerful cue.
Oh, which perfectly solves the mystery of the kitchen.
Yes.
When I'm sitting on the couch, the context of the living room triggers the thought, I need water. I encode that intention while surrounded by the couch, the TV, the lamp.
Right, that's the context.
When I walk into the kitchen, the visual context completely changes. The retrieval cues are gone, so the memory file closes. But when I do the walk of shame back to the living room, the moment I see the couch again, boom. The physical environment provides the lost call number, and I remember the water.
It is incredibly satisfying to finally understand that, isn't it?
It really is.
Yeah.
But before we move on to how we can hack this system, I want to address one more aspect of forgetting from the text. Because forgetting isn't always just misplacing your keys or struggling with a language. Sometimes it's a matter of psychological survival.
That is a critical dimension to acknowledge. The sources dedicate space to the concept of psychological amnesia, specifically stemming from trauma.
Like repressed memories.
Yes, this traces back to Sigmund Freud's psychoanalytic concept of repressed memories. The theory posits that when a person experiences an event that is exceptionally traumatic, overwhelmingly painful, or deeply threatening to their psyche, the mind can deploy forgetting as an extreme defense mechanism.
Protect itself.
Exactly. The memory is forcefully pushed out of conscious awareness and exiled into the unconscious. The individual cannot actively retrieve the memory because the brain is actively protecting the conscious mind from the devastating emotional pain associated with it.
And the text points out that this psychological self-defense can escalate to truly astonishing extremes, like a fugue state.
Yes, the psychogenic fugue is a rare but profound psychological phenomenon. In cases of intense, insurmountable crisis where an individual is utterly incapable of coping with their reality, they may experience highly generalized retrograde amnesia.
So they forget everything.
It goes beyond just forgetting an event. In a fugue state, an individual might completely lose access to their entire autobiographical identity. They forget their name, their history, their loved ones.
That is terrifying.
It is. They often take physical flight, traveling to a new city, assuming a completely new identity, and building a secondary personality that possesses absolutely no knowledge of the trauma or the life of the first personality.
It is the ultimate manifestation of Tolving's retrieval failure, but implemented intentionally by the brain for psychological survival.
Exactly.
It is a sobering reminder that memory isn't just a biological hard drive storing trivia, it is the very fabric of our mental health and our existence. Which brings us, finally, to the application of all this theory.
The fun part.
Yes. We know the intricate mechanics of how a memory is born. We know the pitfalls of the forgetting curve and interference. How do we take the steering wheel? How do we use the science of cognition to our advantage to enhance our recall?
Well, the scientific literature provides a robust toolkit for memory enhancement, broadly categorized under the term mnemonics.
Mnemonics.
A mnemonic is simply any systematic, deliberate strategy designed to improve memory encoding and retrieval. And while there are countless variations, they generally leverage two core principles of the brain: our affinity for visual imagery and our need for structured organization.
Let's dive into the imagery-based strategies first. The text highlights the keyword method, which it suggests is particularly potent for learning foreign vocabulary. Walk me through how this actually works.
Yeah, so the keyword method is basically a two-step process that forcefully engineers deep, elaborative rehearsal by linking unfamiliar acoustics with bizarre visual imagery.
Okay, give me an example.
Let's use the textbook's example, learning the Spanish word for duck, which is pato, pronounced pato. Step 1 is acoustic link. You find a familiar English word, the keyword, that sounds acoustically similar to the target word pato. Pot is an excellent candidate.
Pato and pot. Okay.
Step 2 is the visual link. You must generate a highly vivid, unusual, interacting mental image that combines the English keyword pot with the meaning of the target word duck.
So I close my eyes and I vividly picture a live duck sitting inside a giant cast iron cooking pot full of boiling water, maybe wearing a chef's hat.
Perfect. The more bizarre, the better. Now look at what happens during retrieval. You hear the Spanish word pato. The acoustic similarity instantly triggers the English keyword pot.
Right.
The concept of the pot triggers the vivid visual imagery of your bizarre scene, which immediately hands you the conceptual meaning, a duck.
You know, I have to admit, My initial instinct is to push back on this.
Oh, why is that?
Doesn't this method just create more work? I mean, why should I force my brain to remember a duck, plus a pot, plus a visual narrative of a kitchen, when I could just use rote repetition to memorize pato equals duck?
Uh-huh.
Aren't I just cluttering the workbench?
It's a very logical objection, but it reveals the central paradox of human memory. In a computer, adding more files takes up more space and slows the system down. But the human brain is a semantic network.
Okay, so it works differently.
Very differently. In the brain, adding more connections actually makes a memory easier to find. By adding the acoustic link and the visual narrative, you aren't cluttering the system, you are adding more retrieval cues.
More call numbers in the library.
Exactly. You are attaching 3 strong hooks to the memory trace instead of 1 weak one. If the single hook of rote memorization slips, the memory is lost. If you use the keyword method, even if you forget the exact translation, the image of the pot will act as a fail-safe pathway to retrieve the meaning.
It's engineering redundancy into the system. I really like that. Now, what about the method of loci? Because honestly, this one always sounds a bit like an ancient magic trick to me. Loci meaning locations, plural of locus.
It is an ancient technique, supposedly originating with Greek orators who needed to memorize hours-long speeches without notes. The method of loci is unparalleled for remembering lists of items in a specific serial order.
How does it work?
It capitalizes on our brain's highly evolved visuospatial sketchpad. To use it, you first select a physical space that you know intimately. Down to the smallest detail, your childhood home is usually perfect.
Okay, I have my house in my head.
You then establish a very specific logical route through that physical space. Next, you take the abstract items you need to remember and mentally place them at distinct locations along that route, using the most exaggerated visual imagery possible.
Let's try it in real time. Give me a short grocery list. I need bread, tomatoes, and a bar of soap.
Okay, visualize the front door of your current home. You open the door, and the very first location you see is a small entryway table. Now, take the first item, bread. Do not just picture a normal loaf. Imagine a massive, steaming, 10-foot-long baguette physically crushing the entryway table. The smell is overwhelming.
Okay, the table's totally destroyed by bread. I have it.
Now continue your mental walk. You step into the living room. The central location is your sofa. Take the second item, tomatoes. Imagine the entire sofa is upholstered in bright crimson, squished tomatoes. The cushions are dripping tomato juice onto the rug.
That is gross, but incredibly vivid. I'm looking at the tomato couch.
Finally, you turn toward the bathroom. You look in the sink. Take the third item, soap. Imagine a bar of soap glowing with neon light, violently bubbling and producing a mountain of foam that is flooding out of the bathroom door.
Yeah.
Now, an hour later, you walk into the grocery store. You don't need a piece of paper. You just use your central executive to initiate a mental walk. You mentally open your front door. What is on the table?
The giant steaming baguette. Bread. I look at the couch. It's covered in dripping tomatoes. Tomatoes. I look at the bathroom and foam is pouring out.
Yeah,
Soap. That is unnervingly effective.
it is, isn't it?
The physical locations act as perfectly sequenced, unbreakable retrieval cues.
It leverages spatial memory, which is evolutionarily far older and more robust than abstract semantic memory. Now, beyond imagery, the sources discuss mnemonics that rely on organization.
Like chunking.
Yes, we actually demonstrated the most powerful one earlier, chunking, grouping those 12 random numbers into 3 historical years.
Right. But earlier we talked about chunking as an automatic bypass for short-term memory limits. Now we're talking about using it deliberately for long-term retention.
Exactly. When you are faced with a massive, chaotic list of facts or concepts to learn, do not try to memorize them linearly. Actively analyze the data, figure out underlying organizational principles, and deliberately group smaller, disparate units into larger, meaningful chunks.
You are essentially building a mental filing cabinet with clearly labeled drawers before you start stuffing papers inside.
That's a great way to look at it.
And a simpler version of imposing order is the first letter technique, which is an old, reliable standby for students everywhere.
Yes, taking the first letter of each item in a required list and forming a new memorable word or sentence. The textbook cites the classic acronym VIBGYOR to remember the sequence of colors in the rainbow.
Violet, indigo, blue, green, yellow, orange, red.
Right. It doesn't provide deep semantic meaning, but it provides an incredibly rigid, structured cue that prevents you from forgetting a single item and a complex list.
However, I noticed a very stark warning in the expert text regarding these mnemonics.
Yes, there is a big warning.
It essentially cautions the reader, saying, look, mnemonics like acronyms and keyword imagery are cute, and they work for party tricks or grocery lists, but they are far too simplistic and superficial for rigorous academic study or true professional mastery of a complex subject. For that, you need deep cognitive strategies.
That is a crucial caveat. Mnemonics are essentially cognitive band-aids. They help you memorize, but they do not help you understand.
So what's the alternative?
For true, durable retention of complex material, you must apply the fundamental principles of memory processing we discussed earlier. The first principle is enforcing deep-level processing.
Remind us what that means in practice.
When you are reading a textbook or a dense report, do not just let your eyes glide over the surface words. Force yourself to ask why. Why does this concept work this way? How does this new theory challenge what I already know? Can I think of a real-world example of this?
You have to interrogate the text.
By relentlessly searching for meaning, you are actively building those semantic networks.
The second deep strategy addresses the traffic jam we talked about. Minimize interference. This seems utterly critical for college students or professionals trying to learn multiple new skills.
It is arguably the most violated rule of studying. Maximum retroactive and proactive interference occurs when you study highly similar materials back-to-back in a single session.
Like the French and Spanish example.
Exactly. If you study French vocabulary for 2 hours and then immediately pivot to studying Spanish vocabulary for 2 hours, you are guaranteeing a cognitive disaster. The similar phonetic and grammatical structures will aggressively overwrite and block each other.
So how do you avoid it?
To minimize interference, you must deliberately switch to a completely different subject, like mathematics or history, or, even better, take a walk. Distribute your practice over days rather than cramming.
Give the brain a break.
Give your brain the intermittent, waking rest it needs to consolidate the initial traces before you introduce competing information.
And the final overarching recommendation in the text is a comprehensive, structured study protocol developed by researchers Thomas and Robinson called the PQRST method.
Ah, PQRST.
It stands for preview, question, read, self-recitation, and test. I want to walk through the mechanics of this because if you are a listener prepping for a major presentation, a bar exam, or a college final, understanding why this works is absolute gold.
The PQRST method is essentially a masterclass in forcing the brain through all 3 stages of memory, encoding, storage, and retrieval multiple times. Let's break it down.
Okay, step 1.
Step 1 is preview. When you sit down with a 50-page chapter, do not just start reading the first sentence. Spend 5 minutes aggressively skimming the entire chapter. Read the introduction, look at the bolded headings, analyze the charts, read the chapter summary.
Why, though? Isn't that just wasting time before the actual reading?
Not at all. Psychologically, previewing builds the cognitive scaffolding. It gives your central executive a structural map of the terrain before you enter the weeds.
Okay, that makes sense.
Step 2 leverages that map. Question. Go back to those bolded headings and actively convert them into questions.
Give me an example.
If the heading is the causes of the French Revolution, write down the question. What were the primary economic and social triggers that caused the French Revolution?
I see. It transforms you from a passive receiver into an active investigator. You aren't just absorbing, you are hunting for a specific target.
Precisely. Which leads to step 3. Read. Now, you finally read the core text, but because you have primed your attention with those specific questions, your reading is hyper-focused. You're actively searching for the answers, which naturally forces deeper semantic processing.
Okay, so PQR is done. We've previewed, questioned, and read. Step 4 is self-recitation.
And this is where most people fail. After reading a section, you must physically close the book, look away, and attempt to recite the core concepts and the answers to your questions aloud in your own words.
No, that sounds painful.
It is vital because it shatters the illusion of competence. When you are staring at a textbook, the information is sitting right there in your visual field. It feels like you know it. But only by removing the source material and forcing a retrieval attempt do you discover if you actually encoded it or if you were just experiencing fluency.
It's the ultimate reality check. If I can't explain it to the wall, I don't know it. And the final step is test.
Yes. After completing the entire chapter using the first 4 steps, You'd administer a comprehensive test of your overall understanding. You try to recall the main ideas and how the different sections relate to each other.
So it's a full system workout.
By the time you finish the PQRST method, you have actively manipulated the information on your working memory workbench, you have elaborately rehearsed it into your semantic vault, and you've practiced the specific retrieval pathways necessary to pull it back out. It is the most robust application of cognitive psychology to learning.
It forces you to respect the machinery of the brain instead of fighting against it. Well, we have covered an absolute marathon of cognitive territory today.
We certainly have.
We started by tracing the journey of a memory from the incredibly brief, momentary spark of the sensory registers, the visual flash of the iconic, and the lingering hum of the echoic. We watched the ruthless bouncer of selective attention filter the noise, allowing only the most critical data into the dynamic, manipulative workbench of working memory.
It's a gauntlet.
It is. We saw how deep, elaborative processing, finding the meaning and the connections, is the only way to lock information into the permanent, infinite vault of long-term memory, whether that results in a vivid, episodic flashbulb memory or a foundational semantic fact.
Exactly.
We navigated the treacherous hurdles of the forgetting curve, unpacking why traces don't just decay, but rather get buried by the relentless traffic jams of proactive and retroactive interference.
The battleground.
And finally, we armed ourselves with the empirical, scientifically validated hacks, from the bizarre imagery of the keyword method to the architectural rigor of the PQRST strategy, to ensure we never forget a grocery list, a new acquaintance's name, or the material for a massive presentation ever again.
It truly is a remarkably intricate, beautiful system.
It is.
But as we wrap up, there is one final implication of all this research that I think raises a profound question, something for you to really mull over.
Oh, lay it on us.
Throughout this deep dive, we established that long-term memory is fundamentally permanent. The capacity is virtually limitless. And Endel Tolving's theory of retrieval failure strongly suggests that what we experience as forgetting is very often just an inability to locate the right cue. The memory itself is still intact.
Right.
If both of those scientific premises are true, does that mean that every single piece of information you have ever truly paid attention to, every face you've ever looked at, every conversation you've engaged in, every mundane passing detail that successfully made it past the bouncer and into the vault is still locked inside your head right now?
Oh my God.
Is it possible that your entire life is perfectly preserved in the dark, just waiting for the precise sensory trigger to unlock the door?
Now, that is a thought that will absolutely keep you up at night. Your brain isn't losing files. It is a vast, hidden, infinite library, and you just need to keep searching for the right call numbers.
Exactly.
Thank you for joining us on this incredibly deep journey through the architecture of your own mind. Make sure you actively process what you just heard. Maybe explore the Atkinson-Gifrin model or the PQRST method to a friend today, because if you don't use elaborative rehearsal right now, you are going to fall victim to Ebbinghouse's forgetting cliff by tomorrow morning.
Don't let the cliff get you.
Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep diving deep.